I need to go over some things with you here. Now, the reason I don't go into this kind of detail with all my groups, but I want to with you, because you're my group. And the reason I want to is this, is if I teach you something, and then you go do your own research, then you're gonna see this whole other view thing, and then you're gonna start wondering, okay, was I taught right, or how do I think about this? See what I mean? So that's why I'm teaching you some of this criticism, because if my archaeology teacher heard me give one of my talks, he would disagree with a lot of it, right? Okay, so John Garstang, now you've been to all three cities that Joshua specifically says that he burned. Okay, you went to Hatzor first, you were just at Jericho, and now you're at Ai. This, in 1928, are the three cities that John Garstang excavated. He excavated Jericho first, then he excavated here at Ai, then he identified and excavated Hatzor, then he returned to Jericho for more extensive excavations in the 30s. Okay, so I'm going to read from his excavation report. I just made a copy of it so I don't have to lug the whole book around. What he says about the pottery. He says, in confirmation of date, assured of MB1. Oh, by the way, look at what was in the archives at the Israel Antiquity. This was in the archives. This is his drawing. This is John Garstang's drawing. Look, it's dated 22nd of September 1928. This is a photocopy of it. It's not the original. Okay, and he's drawing for us all the places where he trenched. See that? Yeah. That's one of them right there. That's this one right there. Then he went over on that hill right there. Again, doing archaeology on the archaeologists. He went over on that hill when there were no houses here. And he took this picture, and then he also, September 1928, and then he labeled all of his trenches that he dug. Okay? And then this is what he says. He says, in confirmation of date, assured from Middle Bronze 1 technique was picked out of the bonding of the fourth course of this wall he's talking about, the city wall. And it's made up of this part of the wall, and then you see this stone part too that would come up like this, and a very big wall. So he's saying that it was used in the Middle Bronze. The origins of the defenses were not tested, but evidence was found of the occupation of the site in the early Bronze Age. Okay, so this site was occupied in the early Bronze Age. Then he says this, while as usual, Middle Bronze Age wares were most abundant, there was found a considerable proportion of Late Bronze Age 1. This is the pottery, Late Bronze Age 1, that dates to the time of Joshua and the conquest. Garstang says he found it at Jericho, he found it at Ai, and he found it at Hatzor. So he says a considerable proportion of Late Bronze 1, including in the collection of the American School a Cypriot wishbone handle, which was imported at Cyprus and is a slam dunk to date this to 1400, but nothing from Mycenaean date or character, nor any local fabrics of date later than 1400 BC. He puts the destruction of this city at 1400 BC according to the pottery. And by the way, you can't tell John Garstang that he doesn't know his pottery, because John Garstang, along with William Foxwell Albright and a few other scholars, are the ones who developed the pottery chronology that is still used to this day. The only way Kenyon knows down in Jericho what's the difference between Late Bronze 1 and Middle Bronze whatever is because of Garstang's work and Albright and the ones who went before her. Okay, so you can't tell John Garstang. In fact, one time when I was discussing this with my professor, It's when the light bulb went on for me when my professor said, because I was discussing that John Garstang said that he found late bronze 1 here, and my professor said to me, he said, well, if Garstang said he found late bronze 1, then he found late bronze 1. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, he's the one that developed the chronology, so he knew what late bronze 1 pottery was. Okay, so right there he says that he found late bronze 1 pottery here. Now, we talked about the border then goes in from these 3 cities. So Garstang found late bronze 1 in Jericho, Ai, and Hatzor, 1948. The border goes in. Now Hatzor is in Israel, and Ai and Jericho are in Jordan. What's going to happen? Hatzor, they keep finding Israelite evidence there, right? Because it's in Israel. But on these sites over here, what's going to happen? Now listen, this is Zioni Zevet, a Jewish scholar who is considered the expert on this site. This is what he says. You ready? Extensive and sophisticated archaeological excavations have produced no evidence of human occupation at the site during the period when the Israelites supposedly settled in Canaan. In short, the evidence shows that there was no city at Ai for the Israelites to conquer. That is exactly what Kenyon says about Jericho. Okay, now, one of the excavators here, it was Garstang, then it was a lady named Marquette Krause, who dug here for a couple of seasons, and she was in her 20s and she got sick and she died. Her husband and son later published the early bronze portion of what she dug here, and so Marquette Krause is her name. One time an Israeli archaeologist got up to give a talk in America, and he was talking about Ai, and he started his speech like this. He said, "Ai was excavated by a woman." And the whole crowd cracked up. He was like, "What? What?" Anyways. And then after her, it wasn't dug. That was back in the 30s. It wasn't dug until the 60s. And it was dug by a guy named Joseph Calloway, who was from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. Now, the reason that this is so messed up in Christian scholarship is because they believed Joseph Calloway was telling the truth, and so they went looking for Ai elsewhere, and that's why I spent 7 seasons digging at another site looking for Ai. Okay? However, after doing some research on Joseph Calloway, because I learned over the years what you research first is the excavator rather than the tell. You find out their rap sheet. Who are they? Guess who trained Joseph Calloway? Kathleen Kenyon. And I don't know a lot about the Southern Baptist, but my father-in-law is a Southern Baptist, and this was back in the time in the 60s when the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary were liberal. Maybe you know some about that, but it was back in the 60s. So we're talking about a liberal scholar. I'm telling you, the most deceptive people I've been around over here, scholarship-wise, are the ones that come from seminaries. Now, there's some great seminaries, I'm not saying that, but I mean some of the worst are from these liberal seminaries, going around under the guise of a Christian saying that the bones of Jesus have been found in Jerusalem, for example. Okay, now listen to this. This is a seminary professor who dug here. This is what he says. At Ai, as Jericho, archaeology has raised more problems than it has solved. Now listen to this. I can find no one who has studied the conquest of Ai since Marquette Krause excavations in 1932, and 35 who would disagree. Okay, nobody dug here since Marquette Krause. Nobody has disagreed with me since Marquette Krause. You're the only one that's dug here since Marquette Krause. Okay, so then he says this. Ai is simply, this is a seminary professor and excavator, Ai is simply an embarrassment to every view of the conquest that takes the biblical and archaeological evidence seriously. Perhaps one point should be made in defense of the archaeologists," and then he goes on. Now listen what he says. "There is no late bronze occupation at Etel." Calloway dug here in the 1960s. Garstang says there was found a considerable portion of late Bronze Age 1. There is no evidence of late Bronze occupation. Or the Zioni Zevet. In short, the evidence shows that there was no city at Ai for the Israelites to conquer. There was found a considerable portion of late Bronze Age 1. What's the difference?
Politics.
1948. The exact same issues that are at Jericho are here because they're on this side of the green line of the border. Hatzor, no problem. They keep finding Israelite, all kinds of Israelite evidence over on that side. They haven't found Israelites on this side since 1948. It's politics, it's not archaeology. And it took me a long time and a lot of rabbit trails to finally understand that. It would have saved me a whole lot of heartache. Okay, so let's... Okay, now as we walk along, look at this structure that we're going to be looking at, but you see this corner back over here? It corners off. See that? So it's not a wall. It's part of some kind of a building or massive tower. You see this Bedouin camp to our left. This is the summer camp. You see how they've abandoned it
Oh, yes.
in winter. And then when it heats up, they'll come back. Look at this structure. You see it squares off over here too. So this was a massive tower that went up, and it kind of makes sense that it would be right here because think about where we were at yesterday at Lachish, and they picked the lowest place where the wall was the closest to the ground, and this is that side of this tell. You see the saddle that's down here comes up pretty close to here, and so it seems like this tower was to guard this weak side of the city. And then you see that road that's coming in. That's the road we drove in on. That's the ancient route of how you go to Bethel.
Who's next?
You too. I'm thankfully vegetarian. What a shame.
Well, you can eat bugs as a vegetarian. What are you talking about?
I'm gonna get some of Rachel's honey.
Okay, so I'm standing on the middle bronze wall here, but I gotta cover something else with you right here. That far ridge that we can see that's in the cloud, that's that ridge, that's where Bethel is, right over there. Bethel is this way, where I'm pointing, right?
Yeah.
Which is west of us. So we are east of Bethel, right? Okay, now let me read this. Just try to read it without. Okay, this is Joshua chapter 7, verse 2. It says, "Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai." That's what we just did. We went from Jericho to Ai,
Yeah.
which is near Beth Aven, to the east of Bethel. So Beth Aven is adjacent to Ai, east of Bethel. There's only so many places that can be adjacent to, close to Ai and east of Bethel, right? And go up and spy out the region. So the men went up and spied out Ai. Okay, so Beth Aven, where is Beth Aven? And Beth Aven means house of wickedness. And for a long time, scholars wondered whether this was a city or whether it was just a high place, like the high place for Ai. Okay, so my friends and I came out here. We got a permit from the Palestine Department of Antiquity to do a survey. There's two things you do in archaeology. One is a survey, where you walk around like you do when you're searching for a dead body, but you pick up the pottery from the ground and you mark where you find it, and it tells you where occupations are in a whole region. You walk through all these hills and all over the place. Okay, so we're walking around doing our survey and everything, and you see this hill that's directly over there. You see the top of it, there's a bunch of stone piles on it. You see that? Okay, so we're walking up there doing our survey, and we come across this. An altar.
Whoa.
Okay? And so, is that east of Bethel and adjacent to Ai? Okay, and there's houses associated with it. So then the next year that after we found this, we went and excavated it. So we have excavated this site. It's definitely an altar. The pottery is middle bronze to late bronze 1, and then there's no more pottery. In other words, it's destroyed at the time of Joshua's time. How can this be this late? You just been walking across the hill adjacent to Ai, east of Bethel, and there's an altar sitting there that you can excavate. I don't get it. I really honestly don't get it. I would have thought that would have been found and excavated many, many years ago, many centuries, at least a century ago. Okay? So Beth Aven, Bethel, this has to be Ai.
Part one.
Okay, so they're messing with this place too. Look at this, James.
Oh, why?
And this over here, I don't know. Drives me crazy. Okay, so come over here. Now I'm going to show you this picture, which actually is a picture not of these excavations. It's so bizarre to me that Bethel is the one that everybody agrees on, but you can't see anything there. And this is the one that everybody says the archaeology doesn't line up, and you can see all the archaeology here. But this is a picture from Bethel of a temple that they found there. Look at the masonry. This is a temple they found at Bethel that dates to late bronze 1. And look at that masonry. You see how it looks? This is not a picture of this. This is a picture of a late Bronze 1 Canaanite temple that was found 1.1 miles that way. They date this one early Bronze, and that one late Bronze 1. Either they're both early Bronze or they're both late Bronze 1, but they're not one early Bronze and one late Bronze. Okay, now I gotta show you this. When I saw this, I almost fell out of my chair. I'm in the library and I see this picture of where we're standing right now before it was excavated by Marquette Krauss. You ready? And by the way, this picture is labeled "The Cluster of Stones Covering a Sanctuary."
Whoa.
Okay, so here's the point. Here's the aerial. Here's what it looked like. And here's the aerial that we took of the site that we're standing on where they cleared the stones. Oh man.
Oh, wow, you may hold one.
Yeah, you hold one and I'll hold the other. The way before excavation and after excavation. Now you see why I almost fell out of my chair. Feel like I'm at the weapon with this scroll. Okay. In other words, when Marquette Krauss came here, this whole building that you're standing in right here was underneath a pile of stones that was 28 feet high.
Good. No.
She removed those piles of stones, as you can see, and put the piles all around it. No archaeology layers, just a pile of stones. And when she got to the bottom of the pile of stones, this building.
Wow.
Okay, now, come look at, you used to be able to see more of them, but there's a few of them left here. I don't know why they're putting this pile of stones in here. I don't know what they're trying to do. But look at this that I'm standing on. It's the top of a sacred stone. Do you see it?
With the yellow on it?
Not this one.
Yeah.
This one. So
Yeah.
do you see that? And it's
Right.
broken. Do you see that this is carved?
Uh-huh.
It's a sacred stone that's broken. Look at this one.
Oh.
It's a sacred stone. Do you see the carve right here? Yeah. Broken. There's a bunch more of them underneath that pile of rocks that for some reason they put there. Look over here. Look at this one. Broken sacred stone. Look at this one. Look at this carving. Broken sacred stone. Broken sacred stone. Broken sacred stone. In other words, somebody, remember Amnon Bentor's speech? Somebody came in, destroyed this temple, smashed the sacred stones like you saw at Gezer yesterday, and raised a 28-foot pile of rocks over the top of it. Who done it? There are only 4 possibilities. Okay, now let's turn to the Bible. Let's go up here where we can see a little better, and let's read the biblical account. Okay, now what I want you to know west is, of course, Bethel is that way, and that road there is going to Bethel. See this hill right here? And see this radio tower that's sticking up? That's what I tried to point to you about when we were coming up here.
Right.
So that radio tower is what we're going to use to identify the site. We're going to look at it from another vantage point. We're going to find the radio tower, but we're not standing behind the radio tower, so you got to go to our right, all the way over to this far house to the right. You see that? And we're standing on the summit of I behind that house. Okay? So that's how we'll find I, even though we won't be able to see the actual tell. Now, let me ask you, if you were hiding on the hill behind that radio tower, Would they be able to see you from Ai?
No.
Would they be able to see you from Bethel?
No.
No. Would they be able to see you even if you were coming down this road? If you were on the backside of that hill right there behind that radio tower?
No.
Okay. Jerusalem is that, I don't know why it's gotten hazy all of a sudden. It's like a cloud is going by, but you see that far ridge that you can see?
Yeah.
Barely in the mist? That's Jerusalem. Okay. To the north, we've got this deep valley. See this deep valley coming through here? That separates us from that ridge to the north. You see where those olive trees, the olive grove is? Okay, that's to the north of the city, and there's a deep gorge in between us, a deep valley in between us. Everybody see it?
Yeah.
And then if we look to the east, we look down into the desert, down into the Judean wilderness. You see that? And down to the Jordan Valley. Okay? Everybody's got that, so now we can read the story like we did the David and Goliath story, and it'll all come alive. So Joshua chapter 8. Now remember in 7 is about Achan's sin. So they destroyed Jericho. Achan took some of the devoted things. They came up here. They fought a battle against Ai. They got defeated. They found out it was because Achan took those devoted things. They stoned. You know what they did to Achan and his family? They stoned him and raised a heap of stones over the top of Achan and his family. And then in chapter 8, which we're going to read, they come back to fight again. Chapter 8, verse 1. Then Yahweh said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. Take the whole army with you and go up and attack Ai. For I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. You shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king, except that you may carry off their plunder and livestock for yourselves. Set an ambush behind the city." So Joshua and the whole army moved out to attack Ai. He chose 30,000 of his best fighting men and sent them out at night. So that's where we came up, that route, all together, all 30,000 of us. With these orders, listen carefully. You are to set an ambush behind the city. Don't go very far from it. All of you be on the alert. I and all those with me will advance on the city, and when the men come out against us, as they did before, we will flee from them. They will pursue us until we have lured them away from the city, for they will say they are running away from us as they did before. So when we flee from them, you are to rise up from ambush and take the city. Yahweh your God will give it into your hand. When you have taken the city, set it on fire. Do what Yahweh has commanded. See to it, you have my orders. Then Joshua sent them off, and they went to the place of ambush and lay in wait between Bethel and Ai to the west of Ai. Where's the ambush? Behind that hill, west of Ai and between Bethel and Ai. But Joshua spent that night with the people. Early the next morning, Joshua mustered his men, and he and the leaders of Israel marched before them to Ai. The entire force was with him, marched up and approached the city and arrived in front of it. They set up camp north of Ai. Where'd they set up camp? See where those olive trees are? Okay, 25,000 men are camped there, and 5,000 men are behind that hill. They set up camp north of Ai with the valley between them and the city. You see it? Joshua had taken about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai to the west of the city. They had the soldiers take up their positions, all those in the camp to the north of the city and the ambush to the west of it. That night Joshua went into the valley. When the king of Ai saw this, he and all the men of the city hurried out early in the morning to meet Israel in battle at a certain place overlooking the Arabah. The Arabah is the valley down there, the Jordan Valley. But he did not know that an ambush had been set against him behind the city. Joshua and all Israel let themselves be driven back before them, and they fled toward the desert. So which way did they flee? Yes. All the men of Ai were called to pursue them, and they pursued Joshua and were lured away from the city. Now listen to this, verse 17. Not a man remained in Ai or Bethel. Makes sense, doesn't it? 25,000 men are Israelites are camped down there. What are you going to do? You're going to send your runner down that road over to Bethel. How? Get your men over here. The Israelites are attacking us. Not a man left in Ai or Bethel. They all went in pursuit of them down towards the desert. Not a man remained in Ai or Bethel who did not go after Israel. They left the city open and went in pursuit of Israel. Then Yahweh said to Joshua, hold out toward Ai the javelin that is in your hand, for into your hand I will deliver the city. So Joshua held out his javelin toward Ai. As soon as he did this, the men in the ambush rose quickly from their position and rushed forward. All of a sudden now see 5,000 men coming over that hill right there for this city with no men in it. And rushed forward. They entered the city and captured it and quickly set it on fire. The men of Ai looked back and saw the smoke of the city rising against the sky, but they had no chance to escape in any direction, for the Israelites who had been fleeing toward the desert had turned back against their pursuers. For when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city and that smoke was going up from the city, they turned around and attacked the men of Ai. The men of the ambush also came out of the city against them, so that they were caught in the middle, with the Israelites on both sides. Israel cut them down, leaving them neither survivors nor fugitives. But they took the king of Ai alive and brought him to Joshua. When Israel had finished killing all the men of Ai in the fields and in the desert where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, all the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. 12,000 men and women fell that day, all the people of Ai. For Joshua did not draw back the hand that held out his javelin until he had destroyed all who lived in Ai. But Israel did carry off for themselves the livestock and plunder of this city, as Yahweh had instructed Joshua. So Joshua burned Ai and made it a permanent heap of ruins, a desolate place to this day. He hung the king of Ai on a tree and left him there until evening. At sunset, Joshua ordered them to take his body from the tree and throw it down at the entrance of the city gate. Now listen to this. And they raised a large pile of rocks over it, which remains to this day. Okay? Now, I want to be clear. The Bible does not specifically say that they raised a pile of rocks over the temple. But we know that they raised a pile of rocks over the temple because of archaeology. We have this as one of their practices. If you destroy and burn the city, and this is the temple, this is the holy place on the high place of the city, and you're going to desecrate it, that's what you're going to pile stones over. What the Bible does say is that they piled a huge pile of stones over the gate of the city, and it says that the gate of the city is on the north side in the front of the city. Now, let me show you these aerial photographs. You got to come in close to me. Okay, so here is the city. Here is the draw, the canyon that's going down there. See that? And then here is where they were camped. That's the olive grove that you see over there. Okay, just to orient you. So this is to the north of the city. Okay, now on that north side, again, here is the olives. There's a massive pile of stones right above my finger. Below my thumb is the olive grove to the north of the city. And there's a massive pile of stones, just like the one that used to be over this temple. And it's right on the wall line that we walked in here on. Pile of stones north of the city. They have given us permission to start excavating here. And guess where we're going to go first?
When are you doing
Which again and again in Scripture you read of them piling stones over Achan and his family, and over the gate, and they raise up these stones because they serve then as a memorial of what happened here, or as as a sign of what happened here, kind of like the pile of stones that when they crossed the Jordan River too, right? To remind everyone. So, and I mean, oh, look at this. Where is Zioni Zevit? Come on, Zioni, where are you? Okay, I was reading Zioni Zevit. He's the one that says extensive and sophisticated archaeological evidence have produced no evidence of human occupation at the site during the period in which the Israelites, in short, there is no city of Ai at the Israelite could conquer. Okay, he's the one that says that. However, he goes on, all geographical indications in the biblical text point to the area of Kirbet Etel, that's what this is called, Etel, as the location of Ai. He says, in the course of my visits to Etel, I have been struck by the astounding extent to which the topographic details of the Battle of Ai stated or implied in the biblical accounts can be identified on the ground at Kirbet Etel and the immediate vicinity. Listen to what he says. The Bible tells us, the critic. The Bible tells us that 5,000 man Israelite ambush force took up a position behind the city, between Ai and Bethel, west of Ai. Directly west of Kirbet Etel is a hilly area containing a few prominent rises and deep ravines. This area west of the Tel is connected to by a low, narrow saddle. In this area, probably on its southern slope, that's where we're looking at, where the radio tower is, the 5,000-man Israelite ambush force would not have been visible from the Acropolis of Ai, 1/2 kilometer to the east. In this position, the Israelite ambush force could not have been detected from Bethel to the northwest either. The Bible tells us that the main Israelite force encamped in an area immediately to the north, in sight of Ai, with the wadi between it and Ai. On the north edge of Kirbet Etel, about 375 feet below the top of the Tel, is a wadi, or a dry riverbed. On the north rise of this wadi, opposite Etel, extending in an easterly direction, is a large, gently rolling hill. A large troop could have reached the hill unobserved by approaching it from Jericho through the Wadi al-Asas and winding its way up to the northeast side of the hill to the camp area. Of course, that they weren't trying not to be seen, the 25,000. They were trying to be seen. So anyways, these striking topographical details reinforce the conclusion reached on general geographic considerations that Etel is to be identified with Ai. In fact, they guarantee that the Ai story in the Bible was told about Kirbet Etel. On the other hand, these geographical and topographical details do not prove that the Ai story actually occurred. They demonstrate only that the story was told as having occurred in a particular place that can be identified by geography and topography. Whether the story of Ai is historically accurate, however, is not important. What is important is the meaning of the story. Boy, that is scholarship today.
This is the seminary guy?
No.
Oh.
This is Zioni Zevit. He's a secular Jewish scholar that's considered the expert on Ai. So what they believe is that the Bible was made up later, and that during the time of Josiah, King Josiah, that they decided, hey, the northern kingdom got wiped out, so we need to make up a glorious history because it'll do us good. So they believe that they sent out scribes to these different places, Jericho and here, to make up the story, the myth of Joshua, to give them a glorious history so that they would have... They didn't do that in ancient times. You think the people that ISIS is coming through in Syria are sitting around making up stories about their glorious history? They're trying to survive. So they believe that the scribe who made up this part of things is sitting here looking at this geography while he makes it up. And that the guy down at Jericho is sitting there making that up. Guess what? All you got to do is look at the excavation report and you can see what's above and below ground at the time of Josiah. None of the evidence is above ground at the time of Josiah. The collapsed wall is underground, the burn destruction is underground, the burned grain is underground, everything is underground. It's it doesn't even hold up to the basics of logic. It really is the mythology that is calling the Bible mythology.
When was Josiah?
Josiah was in the 7th century BC. All right, I know you're freezing.